What's up, guys? This is Coach Alex VanHouten on the Faithful Fitness Podcast, and I'm super excited for this conversation we're about to have with Miss Chelsea Blackbird. Chelsea, how are you doing today?
I am great. Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here.
Same. Thank you for being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. It looks like we're going to have an awesome time together. Now, I am so stoked about the conversation we're going to have because, as I understand it, you are the Christian nutritionist and you work primarily with helping women steward their bodies well. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got it. Exactly.
Man, this is going to be an awesome conversation. I'm going to read your bio because I want
Yep.
everybody to know where you're coming from and what you do and what you have done thus far. And then I'd love to get into how you got here. So let's do that. First, and just so everybody knows, I asked Chelsea to tell me what it is she's been up to in the world because you've been up to a lot of things. If I had to articulate it, I don't think I'd do a good job. I'd probably have to ask Chat GPT's help with that. So Chelsea Blackbird is a Christian health practitioner who helps Christian women prioritize self-stewardship and a healthy living base in a biblical foundation. She's the host of the Christian Health Club podcast and the creator of numerous biblically focused health programs, which we will link in the show notes below, including Feast to Fast, the Genesis prescription, and 10 times stronger, and the co-founder of the School of Christian Health and Nutrition, which certifies Christian health practitioners. Chelsea has advanced training in nutritional therapy, gut health, hormones, nutritional blood chemistry, and applied quantum biology. Looks like we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we do. I've been doing this for a while now. So, yep, I got lots of fun things under my belt.
Well, let's talk about how you got here, because this is not no offense, but it's not a normal thing. It's not a normal thing to say, what do we do with our nutrition? Hey, let's glorify God with it. And
Yeah.
that would be powerful and good for both our body and our spirit. So help me understand your story. How did you get to doing what you're doing and why?
Yeah, I had never planned to do this at all in a million years. Couldn't have even imagined this is what I'd be doing, but it certainly felt like a call from God to do so. But how it really started was, I kind of had my own little health issues growing up. And just as I got into my 20s, digestive issues, skin issues, but I thought they were normal. I mean, everybody has their thing. And so I just thought, well, we all have our cross to bear, whatever. But it was when I was ready to start a family with my husband and was having trouble conceiving. I got the diagnosis of unexplained infertility, which basically meant doctors have no idea what's wrong with me. So, um, they wanted to go down the infertility route, and my husband he wasn't having it. He did not want to do that. It was a tough time in our marriage, frankly, because I was like, I'll do anything to have a baby. That's all I wanted to, I've always wanted to be a mom. But my husband, this is kind of funny. He is a grass-fed cattle rancher. Okay. So
Okay.
listen, sometimes the heifers just don't get pregnant and it just takes a while. So he's like comparing me to his cattle. And I was
Thanks,
like,
man.
thanks, babe. That is not helping your case. This is not helping. But
Just what every
anyway,
girl wants to hear.
yes, yeah, exactly. So did not give me the warm fuzzies. But anyway, because of that, because he was just wanted to give it more time. And I was desperate. I just started seeking other avenues. Like, is there anything that I can do to help myself? And so I read about changing nutrition. I ended up going to a naturopathic doctor who changed my diet, went gluten-free, took out some inflammatory foods, gave me some essential fatty acids, just kind of closed the gaps and some things that I was missing. I also read a book about like kind of relearning about my body. And 6 weeks later, I was pregnant.
Whoa.
And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I could have gone through the whole infertility route, and who knows if it would have worked. Looking back, like none of those doctors asked me, what are you eating? What's your diet like? What's your lifestyle like? You know what I mean? And so it was after that and changing my diet, being able to conceive, my genetic skin condition cleared up, my digestive issues went away, all those things changed. And so I just became so passionate about learning about health and nutrition, went through a certification course to become a nutritional therapy practitioner, really was just the intent of wanting the knowledge for me and my family. And so my friends and my family would listen to me because nobody
Mm.
ever wants to listen to you and your family. But I was like, I'll get some credit. They'll listen to me. But then when I went through and learned everything, I just knew I had to share it. And I felt God calling me to share it in a way that would glorify him. Um, every time I would read my Bible, all I could see was health advice. It was like he put a lens over my eyes. And it made sense to me that the creator of our body made the perfect foods for our body, made it in relation to creation, really understanding how he made us and the provision he has given us. It just made sense to me to like wade through all of the just the conflicting opinions out there, because there are many, right? Like you could read scientific studies, you can see influencers, you can see all these people that will tell you the exact opposite things on the same topic. And to me, it's like coming back to a biblical foundation, to our creator as the anchor, just really cuts through a bunch of that junk.
Hmm. Well said. Well said. And thank you for sharing your story. If you don't mind me asking, how
Yep.
long was it between your husband comparing you to a heifer who wasn't conceiving to the time that you were able to? What was that time period for you?
Well, I'm trying to think. From the time that read that book and started implementing, it was called Taking Charge of Your Fertility. I started taking my temperature, doing some things, but really it was about a 6 week time frame from the time that had gone to the naturopathic doctor, and started implementing those things to, you know, finding out I was pregnant. Um, but it took me it took me before that, like to get to the naturopathic doctor and all, yeah, probably several months before that. So it wasn't
I
a long
asked
process.
specifically for many women. This is a really big deal, and I mean, we're not
Yeah.
just going to talk about conception and fertility today, which that would be an interesting podcast, I guess. There's a lot of uh, uh, biblical stories regarding conception and pregnancy,
Yeah.
but that said, that it's a very painful,
Yes.
psychologically, it's a painful
Yeah,
process for women to go through
it
to
is.
be. And obviously I'm talking as a guy, but I'm married and I have, sisters, and I was raised by wolves. I mean, women. I'm just kidding. and and the idea that my body is working against me and it's
Yeah.
not doing what I expect it to do, that is pervasive in the health and fitness world, not just with regard to conception, but with regard to
Yes.
body composition, with regard to digestion, with regard to even exercise recovery. And so I wanted to highlight that in your story, because there's a time when a you know man, woman gets an opportunity to say, I have some agency with the body God's given me. And
Yep.
and what does it look like to steward that well? What does it look like to make the most out of this gift that I've been given? Jesus said after the parable of the pounds, to whom much is given, much is required. And there's this very, very strange but deep idea that one of the things that we have definitely been given is this body. And
Yep.
sometimes it feels like a blessing, and sometimes it's like, this is very annoying. So,
Yes.
so I wanted to highlight that place in
Yeah.
your journey, because that 6 week process is not just a 6 week process. That's also kind of a capstone to months, maybe even years of pain and difficulty that came. It sounds like came to wonderful fruition in your life.
It did. And my story is not everybody's story, but I think what we can all take away from it is the fact that, um, our body, what my body was telling me is, hey, I am not ready to grow a baby. I do not have what I need. I did not have certain things. And so I think we need to pay attention to those things, and that we really have to honor and, like you said, steward our body well, give it what it needs. And when we give our body what it needs, that is when it can perform and do all the things that we want it to do. But you're right. And that's one thing I always try to share with people is your body is not against you. It is always on your side.
Mm.
And when it is doing something like maybe holding on to fat or maybe not conceiving or whatever it is, there's can be an underlying root cause for that the body is just in some kind of protective mode for you that you don't really understand. It needs something. It's deficient somewhere. And so those are the things we want to explore, is really getting down to how can I take care of my body so that it can do what it needs to do?
Well said. So if there's a woman listening to this right now, specifically to the ladies, if there's a woman listening, watching this right now, and she's starting on her journey to say, hey, okay, God, you gave me this body. I want to make the most of it. In my mind, the prayer that comes to heart is, Lord, teach me to do this well. Teach me how to feed myself well. Teach me how to move myself well. But again, I'm not a lady. So in your heart, is there a different prayer that you'd be praying, or that you would lead that individual to begin praying?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is spot on. I mean, just really praying for the Lord to give direction and have that heart for stewarding the body. That's what's different because so many people are looking to be well because they want to fit into a certain size, right? Or they want to be some standard, they want to look a certain way. But when we kind of change our heart posture to I want to be well, so I serve well. When I eat well, I feel well, I serve well. I show up better in the world. I show up nicer to my family. I can, have those fruits of the spirit, patient, love, kindness. I can fully live into my purpose.
Mhm.
What God has for me. We each have unique gifts in a special way. We're meant to bless the world. And there is nothing more that the enemy likes than to keep us all, caught up and take up a bunch of brain space with, things like our weight and our ailments and comparison and all those things. And just really asking the Lord to clear that out and give you focus on stewarding the body well. And that being our highest health goal is just to be an excellent vessel for the Holy Spirit.
That's extremely well said. Thank you very much for that. I don't even know exactly what denomination or faith tradition you're from, but I do exactly speak the same language personally with my clients. And in the Better Daily community, Better Daily is the sponsor for the Faithful Fitness podcast. In the Better Daily community, we often will say, look, like you can lose weight, you can get faster and run longer, you can have six pack abs, whatever. That's fine. But those fitness goals ultimately are vanity compared to the idea, Lord, I want you to show me how to align my physical body with the spiritual purpose you've placed on my life. I want you to help me remove my obstacles physically from pursuing this. I'll give you an example personally. So with me, I have two young boys. How many kiddos do you have now?
I have three.
You have three boys or girls?
Two boys and a girl is my
Okay,
youngest.
so you get to experience all the stuff. I only
Yeah.
know boys, so I don't know anything about raising daughters. But with boys, one of their love languages is rough and tumble play, man. Like just wrestling them, and love with boys looks like a knee to the gut and tickling and throwing them somewhere, and they'll get you back too, especially as they get bigger. But with my body, one of the things I have to wrestle with is a genetic condition called Ehlers-Danlos, and it makes my ligaments and tendons much looser than they should be, and so what happens is I'm much more prone to injury than most guys my age. And so when it comes to fathering them well, if I'm in pain, if I'm in a position where I can't keep up with them, then one of my spiritual missions is to be a good father to my boys, to teach them strength and courage and love and grace, and to do that in the way that speaks to their little hearts. But if my body is an obstacle to that process, I've got some work to do. Obviously, it's not as easy as just saying, "Hey, I'm going to fix this," but I have some work to do, and so my prayer is, "Hey, Lord, teach me how to make this body work for the spiritual purposes you've given me." And in that way, maybe I'll get stronger. Maybe I'll have a better body composition. Maybe my metabolism I'll be in a better mood. All those things, but the point of it is the vanity of the fitness obstacle, the fitness process is removed because
Yeah,
it is in service to that higher good work that I'm up to. Is that in keeping with your
exactly.
experience?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. And just looking at it that way. Exactly.
So I do have a question, and then I have a few other questions about the work you've done to support women. But my question is this: it has been my experience, and again, I don't know exactly your denomination, but it's been my experience in the Christian community that health and fitness is a sidebar issue for most. In fact, just this past Sunday, my pastor in my church stood in the pulpit, and I gave him a hard time about this because he knows where I'm coming from. But he stood in the pulpit and he goes, "I don't know about you guys, but I love oatmeal cream pies." And he was talking all about how it was really hard to say no to oatmeal cream pies, and he's got some work to do on the health and fitness front. But what's interesting to me is here, at least in Greenbrier, Arkansas, health and fitness is kind of a joke in the Christian community. Like, oh, I should probably work out more. I should probably get a handle on my nutrition. There's donuts in the lobby when people come to church
Right.
and that sort of thing. And so for me, it's obviously I want to have grace and not judgment in with respect to helping the Christian community take ownership and stewardship of the body God's given them. But man, we are fighting quite the uphill battle. Have you experienced the same in your spheres?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really shocking how lacking this kind of focus is in the church community, across all church communities that I've seen. I work with women in my groups, they're all denominations. I don't work with a certain one, but in the churches, this isn't even really talked about. And any kind of gathering, any kind of Sunday school or anything like that is it's kind of just like in the actual schools. It's just focused on treats and, foods. And, there's times for feasting and we can come together and fellowship and we can feast and such. But it's just kind of turns into an unhealthy gorge fest, sadly. But it is shocking that there's not more focus on this in the world because, each of us are individuals. We are a body in the body of Christ, each of us. And, when we are healthy individually, we are more healthy collectively, right? And then we are just like we were saying, we're just going to be able to show up and do that more of that work God calls us to do in the world. Because if we're, not feeling well and we're spending a lot of time, like we're just tired. We don't want to get off the couch. We don't want to engage. We don't want to do anything. We're in a bad mood. We don't want to smile at the grocery store cashier because we just feel junky. Whatever it is, all of those things, we are the hands and feet of Christ in the world, and we're repping him all the time, right? And so how we show up, how we feel, how we, just exude and love and show our energy just is representing him. It says a lot about it. And I think, just feeling well, healthy, taking care of our bodies is such an important piece of that. Well, taking care of ourselves spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. It's all one, it's the full package. And so we can go to church and take care of our spiritual health and get in our Bibles, but that's one piece of it. We've got to take care of the other parts as well.
So there's a verse in the Old Testament where God tells Abraham, "I have made a covenant with you. Now walk before me with integrity." And one of the disciplines in the Better Daily community, we call it the integrity discipline, but really at the end of it, at the base of things, it's the nutrition practice. It's that our body becomes what we eat over time.
Mm-hmm.
That's the process of renewal and regeneration.
Sure.
I like to say you are the burning bush. That's you have this mitochondrial reaction happening in your body, but you're not consumed. You're actually renewed over time. And so one of the things we work to help people with is that foundational process of feeding yourself well, which is individual
Right.
to each person. You've got your special snowflake of issues, and I've got my special snowflake of issues. I might need more. We're learning this in nutrigenomics right now. I might need more B12 than you do. You might need more calcium than I do. Whatever. The point is, if I learn how to take good care of this body that I have, then it's a great foundation to build from. And Christ said that the man who listens to my teaching and does them will be like a man who builds his house on a rock. And so I love that your practice focuses on nutrition, specifically for ladies, because if guys have their issues, man, well, let me just say that your hormonal system is much more complicated than ours. So getting it fed well is a huge piece of feeling good, showing up well for your family, showing up well for yourself, and not doing too much to hurt your joints or your digestive tract. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the things you're seeing in the work that you're doing nutritionally that are the low-hanging fruits for ladies with regard to the nutrition practice?
Sure. Well, I think for women, what I see a lot of is just a very simple balance. And this is really what led me into creating my programs is like over when I was meeting with clients one-on-one, I was seeing the same things over and over. And one of the first things I was seeing is just that blood sugar dysregulation, just kind of having macronutrients out of whack, a little heavy on the carbs, a little light on the protein and fats. And just bringing that back into better balance with those macronutrient ratios can go a long way in helping women keep those steadier moods, steadier hormones. And so that's probably like the most low-hanging fruit, I would say, is really just getting enough protein and balancing the carbohydrates and the fats. Those are both sources of energy for the body. I always tell people, our proteins kind of our steady eddy. And then we've got our proteins and our fats. And those can work more, they work in like an inverse, like a seesaw relationship to one another. When one is up, the other is down. We don't want to overflow our body with too much energy, of which both of those things are. And so it's just kind of looking at that. And some people do a little bit better with maybe a little higher fat. Maybe some people do a little better with higher carb. It's really kind of figuring that out for the person, like you said, bio individual. But that is the most low-hanging fruit that I have found for people, just for that can really, the body can change very quickly. That's one thing that is amazing about the body, is that when you start making changes, it responds very quickly because
Hmm.
God made us so smart. So our body's so incredibly smart.
That's exactly right. He created something very good. That's what he said.
Yes.
He said, "This is
Yes,
very good."
it is very good.
And
Yes.
and so this I want to dig into some very specific things that you've put out, the fast to feast and the Genesis prescription. But uh, there was something you said there that I wanted to hinge on. Just a second. It left me. It's coming back. There it is.
No,
So, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no. Go. I was gonna say, I feel you. I had sometimes have to give it time to come on back around.
So there's when it comes to nutrition, there's a lot of misinformation in the world, and it when we're talking here, somebody might hear, "Wow, this sounds really complicated." And from a biblical perspective, you might notice that the early church fathers, Christ Himself, maybe even back in Genesis, nobody's talking about macros. And so
Right.
I want to make sure for our viewers and listeners that we say, look, we live in a time of abundance where the foods that abound, or the food like substances that abound, aren't necessarily the sorts of things that the early church fathers or Christ himself or even the early Abrahamic stories. Nobody was wrestling with Doritos in the pantry. Nobody was walking through the aisles of the grocery store trying to decide which protein bar is best for
Exactly.
them. And so we do have a real issue of abundance today. And in a way it's good. It's kind of that stewardship idea. We've been given much. And so there's a requirement on our part, as I understand it, and a responsibility on our part to learn how to navigate that well for ourselves. And that's why, individuals like yourself, Chelsea, and I, why we have to educate a bit on macronutrients. Sure, I know it sounds complicated. It really isn't. We can learn
Right.
it, but that these things are about stewarding the abundance that we have in front of us. And I'm with you. That blood sugar thing, elevating your protein, that's a super low hanging fruit for individuals, and it will help you feel so much better, so much faster.
Yeah. Yeah. I love exactly what you're talking about. I call it the blurse, the blessing and the curse. It's a blurse. We have
Right.
so much food. We don't have to worry about going hungry. But at the same time, yeah, there's like an entire category of carbohydrates that didn't used to exist in the world. And so I find that carbohydrates are the trickiest macronutrient for people just because it's so large, where, biblical people, it would have been produce, vegetables and fruits, and then some grains. Well, now we've got this entire processed food category. And so it can be very difficult to navigate, right? But I think when we have an understanding of that and think about historically, biblical people or ancestors in general could only eat what was available, what was local, what was seasonal. Nothing was being shipped across the world, and so just to me, it's also just thinking common sense wise,
Mm.
you know, um, and I think about, I'm older than you, but when I was kind of going through some of those formative nutrition years, it was the food pyramid, when it was like eat 1 billion carbs and don't eat any fat, right? And animal fat is bad and that whole thing. Well, if you think historically, nobody was importing olives and coconuts into the United States. Like olive oil, coconut oil, those are great healthy fats. What were they eating? They're primarily eating animal fat because that is what they had in front of them. right? And so just kind of keeping it, or the seasonal local fruits. They weren't eating mangoes in December, right? None of like I feel like having a mango today. Well, I mean, if it wasn't seasonal, you're not getting it.
Hmm.
So just kind of looking through that common sense perspective. That's one thing I love about thinking biblically, historically, is just that it gives us some common sense perspective of, oh yeah, nobody was eating Doritos.
Right.
Yeah, like butter was a normal thing. And just really coming back to those really good, simple foundations of nutrition.
Hmm. Well said. So you have a product called the Fast to Feast. Am I saying that right? The
Feast
Fast
to
to Feast.
fast, feast
Feast
to
to Fast.
fast.
Feast to
Yeah,
Fast.
yeah.
So I'm a huge proponent of fasting, personally, both from a spiritual and from a physical perspective.
Sure.
However, I have found in the literature that there's not a very large amount of differentiation in the studies between men in women. I
Right.
know that the male and female chemistry, particularly for women of childbearing age, I know that it responds to fasting differently. Also, depending on where you are in your cycle and whatnot. So I'd love to hear from you what some of your advice is to young women, particularly between the ages of menarche and menopause. What I say ages, you know what I'm talking about.
I do, I do.
That if they're working to implement fasting in their world in a way that is good for their body, but also good for their spirit, what are some of the things that you've been advocating for individuals that, and also if they want to continue their journey on that front to grab that product in the show notes as well. But what have you been teaching that's been helpful in your clients?
Sure. Well, in Feast to Fast, and generally speaking, we focus on intermittent fasting, which to me falls anywhere between 12 to 16 hours. And I really think anything above that is a little bit of a longer fast. So, and 12 to 16 hours to me that's just regular. That's like going back old school days. That was just like, guess what? The kitchen's closed at dinner and we don't eat till breakfast. Again, like this common sense kind of thing. That's just what was normal. There wasn't ice cream in the freezer. There wasn't nuts in the pantry. Like you ate dinner and then you stopped. And then you had it the next day. And so 12 to 16 hours, I think, is doable for most people. Now, we got to get into some nuance there. And I think of intermittent fasting. A lot of people think you have to do a long extended fast, which are wonderful spiritually. But also, intermittent fasting is honoring the way that God made the body. Sometimes, there's an eating window. Sometimes we eat and sometimes we fast. And when we are fasting overnight, there is incredible healing things that are happening in our body. We get to give our body enough time to do that. And so I believe we're truly honoring the body when we're doing intermittent fasting. We're honoring the way God designed it to be well. Now, certainly there can be some nuance depending on how maybe, where a woman is in her age, in her life, in her stress levels. I find that's the biggest key is stress levels because fasting is stressor, as is exercise. These are hormetic stressors. They're supposed to be good for us. But if you have too many stressors piled on, well, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And so I think for some women, maybe fasting closer to a 12-hour fasting window instead of a 16, if there's a lot of stress in the life, and just kind of feeling that out. But one hormone that we really, really want to pay attention to is leptin. I don't know how much you talk about this with women, but I see a lot of leptin resistance with people. And leptin is the hormone that tells your brain how much fat you have stored on the body so that it can give the information to your brain. Oh, Chelsea has this much fat on her body. So tomorrow, this is how much fat you can burn. This is how much fat you need to hold on to. Right. So that's the information that our fat cells actually give our brain. Most of that information happens at night when you sleep, by the way, which is why sleep's so important. That big delivery to the hypothalamus is given in the night while we're sleeping. But we want to get that leptin signaling. And so if somebody is not getting that message to the brain that's explaining how much fat is on board, a lot of people don't have that message. And so I do find that eating earlier in the day, breaking the fast earlier in the day rather than later in the day, maybe skipping dinner instead of skipping breakfast can be helpful for women trying to overcome leptin resistance. Getting up, eating within an hour of sunrise and reinforcing to the brain and the body, listen, I've got plenty of energy on board. Feel free to burn some.
Mm,
feel
mm,
free feel free to burn some of that fat, right? But sometimes these hormones and these signals get mixed up, crossed, just like insulin resistance, there's leptin resistance. And so I think those are the things to take into account that I'm really looking at more so, like stress levels. What is our level of insulin resistance, leptin resistance? How are these hormones communicating with each other? Is your brain and your body getting the right message so it knows what to do? So,
mm. Well said. And thank you for that. I think that's a wealth of knowledge. I actually, while you were talking, I had a funny thing run through my head. One of our community members recently shared uh, a Leviticus verse, which, I mean, if you're reading the Bible and you get to Leviticus, a lot of people skip over that because it's like, oh man, the law. This is hard. This is a little bit of a dry reading, but it was a really interesting verse about how you put the fat on the altar, because we burn the fat because the fat is the Lord's. And she said, if
mhm.
I'm a living sacrifice, then I'm gonna give it all. Like, here you go, take it all, Lord, take it all. Burn my fat. I
I
don't need this.
love it.
Crack me up. But as you were speaking there, that's something I regularly coach individuals toward, which is I would love for you to get the majority of the nutrients you need in a day before lunchtime. And what something that interesting that's happened in intermittent fasting in the mainstream is it's become a fancy reason to skip breakfast. And and unfortunately for many bodies, that's not the right circadian rhythm.
Right.
Metabolically speaking, energetically speaking, even when it comes to recovery from exercise. And so I love that. Thank you so much for that tidbit. And I'm going to repeat it for the ladies watching and listening, that if you are going to implement intermittent fasting, or time restricted eating is sometimes what the research calls it, that it would be better for you to have an earlier dinner or late lunch and have a nice breakfast earlier in the morning, so that your 12 to 16 hours, as Chelsea was talking about, is shifted more so toward the evening being the start of your fast, rather than the late night being the start of your fast, and skipping breakfast in the morning. Thank you. That's very powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also when it comes to fasting, and one thing I teach with people is I think our fasting window can and is meant to change throughout the year, based on the light. So this kind of goes into my other program, the Genesis prescription, which is very quantum and circadian driven. But, you know, there were many years there, I'd be in the summertime and I've been trying to do my, get on my intermittent fasting. And I'm like, I'm on a different eating schedule in the summer. It's light till like 10 o'clock at night where I am, and it was just a struggle for me until I really started realizing that, when the light is longer, we can have a longer eating window and a shorter fasting window. And then it's
Mm-hmm.
more natural in the wintertime to have a shorter eating window and a longer fasting window when there's more darkness. And so
Absolutely.
really following the circadian and the infradian rhythms, I think that's another consideration to make. The earth is not static, and neither are we. And it's normal to have some shifts and change as we go throughout the year, and maybe not have a static eating plan or fasting plan. Really kind of working it, what I like to call in relation to creation.
Mm.
Our bodies are made alongside creation. We're made alongside water and the land and animals and plants. And the way that it all works together is going to shift as everything changes throughout the year.
Yes, well said. I second that. And not no offense meant in the least, but if that sounds frou-frou to anybody, like, ooh, a little hokey new age, it's not. No, like our
No.
research is actually bearing it out, that our metabolic processes slow down during the winter time, that we actually tend toward fat accumulation if we're not doing
Yeah.
anything differently, and that during the summertime our metabolic processes speed up. And I find for my clients that we're generally catabolic. We find it's a lot easier to lose fat and to grow muscle during the summer, when you're more active, and metabolically speaking, you're more active during the light hours. 6,000 years ago, we couldn't just flip a light on. That wasn't
Eh,
normal.
Exact. Nope. It
That
was
wasn't
not normal.
and that's not when the critters like to pop out either. And so when we're talking about time to eat and time to train and whatnot, one of the practices that I coach people in is, hey, it's winter time. You're going to be eating more Christmas cookies, even if you don't mean to. It just happens.
Right.
And what's cool about that is, if I'm training my body, and I know that exercise isn't necessarily, I imagine you tell your people that's good to do,
Absolutely.
but and that's something God made our bodies to do. But that during that time, if I work to change the way I eat, I can also spend this time growing some muscle and making sure that that extra nutrients, that extra fuel is put to good use, so that the tissue that I accumulate isn't all negative, isn't necessarily a bad thing. And during the summer, it's a time to be more endurable. Do you find something similar in the energetic way that you're coaching your clients?
Well, yeah. And well, we're talking about macros earlier. And I also think just like with fasting, our diet can change again locally, seasonally throughout the year. When we think of summertime, kind of late spring to early fall is a time of naturally more carbohydrates. It's because it's a time of more natural UV light, which is present, so which we really need to grow plants. And so it's a time that maybe we have a little, we have a shorter fasting window. Maybe we have some more carbs. And then going into the winter when there's a frozen ground and we're not growing a lot of fresh plants and such, maybe that's a time where a little higher protein, a little higher fat. Um, and so I think, I love teaching about the way that, the sun and light really impacts and influences our metabolism, and the way that our body knows how to use nutrients and calories, if you will, or energy. And so I think those are all important things to keep in mind, certainly.
Hmm. So in your work, I'd like to switch gears just a little bit and talk biblically with you for a moment,
Yeah.
and ask what are some perhaps verses, passages, or stories that inspire the work that you do with regard to nutrition.
Yeah. Well, I guess really the Genesis prescription is probably my greatest love and passion in guidance. I tell people I feel like God just laid out all of our best health advice right there in the book of Genesis with the creation story, because we are part of creation. We are made alongside creation. And when we consider, he made light, he made water, he made land, the earth, and earthing and grounding are incredibly important, right? For picking up electrons, remaining in a net negative, a net negative mode. That's how we're most healthy. Then comes your plant, food, your animal foods. He breathed life to us through our nose, not our mouths. Mouth breathing is very stressful to the body, so nose breathing. He calls us to rest. He calls us to be in fellowship, and he calls us to move. Those are all elements right there in Genesis, laid out basically in the creation story and a little beyond, that give us our best insight to me on the full picture of being healthy. Because after many years of focusing solely on nutrition, then I felt God just leading me to this kind of bigger picture. Like, if food is important, it is so important. But to be fully well, we need to look at the bigger picture of these different elements like light and grounding and water and breath and all of these other things.
Awesome. I want to talk about grounding specifically in a second, can you describe for me, if individuals were to connect with your Genesis prescription, how do they do that, and then what does that process look like?
Sure. Well, I've got a lot of podcast episodes on it explaining it. When I work with people now in my membership group, and so we run through all of my different programs throughout the year, the Genesis prescription, Feast to Fast, 10 times stronger, all of these different things. It's very hard to teach somebody something, there's so much to work with and implement and apply. It's not something that can be done in just 3 or 4 weeks.
Hmm.
Right. And
Hmm.
so I found taking care of our body is an ongoing process. It's an everyday choice. We wake up, his mercies are new every day. Every day we wake up, we have to make choices about what we're going to do with our body. And so just really layering in the education, layering in these different biblical principles throughout the year. That's really how I love best to work with people, to take them through the different programs that explain, oh, we're going to work on blood sugar regulation and Feast to Fast and macronutrients. We're going to work on the sun and the grounding and such in Genesis prescription. So just layering things on as we move throughout the year.
Hmm. Awesome. And then as somebody grows, obviously through that process, this year's journey might look a little different from next year's journey. God willing, you have another year, and so that
Yeah.
that you might come back to grounding and go, oh, like there's some things that I can implement that before, they wouldn't fit, or I wasn't into it or whatever,
Exactly.
but now it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's just like reading your Bible, like no matter you can read it and read it again, but when you come back to verses, they mean different things to you depending on what season of life you're in, right?
That's exactly right.
And so as we go through our health journey, we're just peeling that onion back. We're not ready for everything at once. Some things don't make sense to us at certain times, but when we just keep at it and just layer in these different things, you come back around to it and you're like, okay, this makes sense. I can do this longer. I can fit this in better. This makes more sense to me. And
Hmm.
so it's just an ongoing refining process. You're absolutely right.
And in our community, we have the slogan, we say 1% better every day, because the goal is like everybody starting in a different place. And all of these things
Yes.
are generally good, but what we want to do is do it in a way that we can progress through it,
Right.
and from our starting point, and do it together. Because
Yes.
in the community setting, and you said that you have a membership community yourself,
Yes.
in the community setting, there's something powerful about knowing that everybody in that community is working toward better, even if they're in a different place than you are.
Exactly. And that fellowship and just, you bring together a bunch of believers with the same intention, right? Of caring and stewarding for our bodies well. It is a different energy. It is just a different motivation, accountability, and fellowship. And it's really powerful, like you said.
Mm. And I see one of the things that is good to talk about is what we see kind of in the future of health and fitness. Do you see this faith-based community setting of health and fitness being really not just your vision and mission way forward, but a vision and mission that would benefit Christ's church and also the faith community at large?
Absolutely. I see more and more people seeking and understanding that spiritual health and is so important and that our emotional and mental health is so influenced by our spiritual health and our soul, right? And so
Mm.
yes, and it's so interesting when I felt God calling me to be the Christian nutritionist all those years ago, I was like, no, not me, Lord. What are you talking about? Because I was, as a faithful person, I went to church, I read my Bible, but I was very private and I didn't talk about it openly. And so when he's telling me to do this, I'm like, God, I am not evangelical like that. I don't know enough about the Bible. What are you talking about? Right. And so, but my point in saying that is that over all these years, people, will reach out to me. I found you because I Googled the Christian nutritionist. I'm looking for somebody to work with that is aligned in my values. And unfortunately, I feel like you mentioned New Age earlier. So many programs and things out there are, of that kind of universal nature. Like I think the people are recognizing that need for the spiritual health as being part of the bigger package,
Mhm.
but a lot of it is bent on those more kind of new agey, oh, the universe and that kind of thing. And no, like we're here to glorify the creator of our body. We're here to glorify Jesus, be the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. And so I think we have to be careful with that because that's why I think it's so important what you're doing and what we train our people to do. That's one of the reasons I started the School of Christian Health and Nutrition because a lot of people are like, how did you learn to be a Christian nutritionist? I'm like, well, I learned to be a nutritionist, but the other part just came from the Lord. And so, like, I want to be trained like you were trained. So my business partner and I, who practices like I do, we put together an entire school that teaches people how to be Christian health practitioners. That it includes, everything we're talking about today, all of the elements of the Genesis prescription, all, everything about the food, spiritual, mental health, everything, because we need more feet on the ground doing this kind of work. That's why I'm so glad to connect with you and others like you doing this work because it's just so critical.
Mhm.
We need these people in our churches. We need them in our communities. I feel like
Mhm.
every church should have a health minister, or somebody teaching like a point person that is there as a resource or as a counselor and how to be, how to keep the stewardship of our health. I think it's that important.
Yeah, Paul said in First Corinthians that you're a temple of the Holy Spirit. So
Yes.
glorify God with your body. It's like,
Yep.
whoa. And now
Exactly.
he was talking a lot about sexual immorality at the time, but through First Corinthians, he's also teaching the early Christian church how to understand their physical self in relationship to their new spiritual self and what it means to be born again. And sure, eat your Doritos. It's not a sin, but is it
Right.
really the best way? is it really the best way to say thank you to God for the gifts he's given you in both your salvation and also with the creation of your body? And I just want to say thank you for your work, because it's there's an urgency. There's an urgency in today's world for specifically, I believe, for Christians to get out of our own way
Yes.
when it comes
Yes.
to fighting there's a battle at hand. There's a spiritual battle
Mm.
at hand, and
Yes.
the forces of evil don't see you much as a threat when you can't even figure your own body out. It's like, well, like I'm running in circles. I feel like crap every day. My head's all cloudy. Like, oh man, Satan's doing this. Like, hey, Satan's not doing anything to you. You need to stop feeding yourself garbage and get some good rest and move and take good care of yourself. And then, man, now watch out, because now you're on the radar. Now you're
Right.
dangerous.
Right. And I think, a lot of Christians, they pray for good health, they want for good health, and we should always pray for good health, but also
Absolutely.
receive what is given to us. God has given us all the provision to be well, and so much of it is free. Step out and get some sunshine. Step outside, get some nature, get some sunshine. Put your hands in the earth, put your feet on the earth, ground, drink clean water, breathe, calmly. Like I always say God did not make our healing inaccessible. It is very accessible to us, but we have to receive it. We have to do our part.
Mm.
And there's so much that we can do. And as you've said, and as I've said, our body is amazing. We are amazing creations, and it starts changing quickly when you give it what it needs. It truly does. When um, I've seen women over the years, and we start doing something like just, reducing our carbs a little bit and maybe bringing those macronutrients back into better balance. Again, like within 2 to 3 days, um, you know, women are feeling better. They're losing some of that water weight, some of that inflammation. The body just starts changing right away. And I think that's really encouraging. And so just, do it, stick with it, and just receive what he's given you.
So I'd like to tackle grounding for just a second, and then I think it would be best to let you have the last say before I pray us out and sign off this pod. We got like 8 minutes. I hate that, because I could talk to you for a couple more hours, it seems. But I want to make sure that we get to talk about the subject. So grounding, again, from the New Age perspective, was this idea that you take your shoes off and you walk with your bare feet and you feel the mud, and maybe it lines you up cosmically with the universe or whatever. But there's this very, I've found it's very hard to research, but there's this deep biblical idea of being in connection with the earth. When Moses finds the burning bush, the first thing God says to him before he even tells him who he is, he says, take off your shoes, because the ground you're standing on is holy. And that's I don't know if God's like, hey, you should be grounded, brother.
Right.
But there is this deep idea that being skin contact connected to the earth is a powerful, maybe even holy thing to be a part of. So with your background with quantum biology and study on that front, in your mind, when you're encouraging people to practice this, one, how can they do it? And two,
Sure.
what's kind of the 10,000-foot view of why?
Yes, absolutely. Is one of my favorite things to talk about. Well, there is absolutely no denying the fact that our bodies are meant to be in a net negative charge to be healthy. We need more electrons than protons. That is just a fact. It is a scientific fact. Period. The end. We are electrical beings. That's why, when you can go get an EKG and EEG to measure your heart and your brain electrical activity, and if you're flatlined, you're dead. So we are electrical beings. We need electrons, and we need a lot of them. We can get electrons in three ways, ma primary ways: sunshine, from UV light. We can get them from grounding from the earth. The earth is a reservoir of electrons constantly replenished by lightning, and we can get them through food. And our body uses electrons to make energy, to make ATP. What's so fascinating, and so when we ground, what we're doing, we're picking up electrons from the earth. That's it. It's as simple as that. Our body, we are conductive and we are picking them up. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds woo-woo, but it's scientific fact. And again, it makes me go back to several things. God did not make our healing inaccessible. And as Christians, we are called to believe in things that we cannot see. We cannot see our body picking up electrons, but just because we cannot see these mechanisms doesn't mean it's not happening. So whether you're gardening, you're just walking barefoot and, in the grass or the dirt or the sand, we're picking up electrons that give our body that material to make energy. And so one of the things that, I like to share with people and is related to food is the fact that only about a third of our electrons are meant to come from food. The other 2/3 are meant to come from nature. And we are so disconnected from nature in our modern day. So what does that mean? That means we are more reliant on food. That means our body will be driven to want to eat more food because it needs to get electrons from somewhere. And so if you're not getting what you're supposed to be getting from nature, like if you think historically, biblically, people were outside all the time. They lived outside. They were wearing conductive clothing. They were wearing conductive shoes. We're blocked off from all of that. And so if we have to rely more on food, where our appetites are going to be driven higher, we're going to be, have these cravings that are feeling out of control. And so it's just one of the many pieces that we need to think about that fit in here to the bigger picture of health, right? And so grounding is just one of the simplest ways to get out and get your electrons. And, electrons, again, we're making energy to run our body. Our body doesn't run on calories. It doesn't run on carbohydrates. It runs on electrons. That's what we're pulling from carbohydrates and fats. We're pulling electrons. So I think when people understand, when we start understanding that and understanding there's more ways to get electrons than just food, and then if we can get outside and we're having a little bit better of a balance, then we have a little bit more wiggle room in our diet as well when we are honoring the other ways that our body is supposed to be getting those electrons to make energy. I could talk about this for hours and hours.
I feel you. I see the passion and I appreciate it. And I want to make sure to clarify, it's so simple to do, right? You literally just take your socks and shoes off. Yeah. And you go outside and make sure your feet are in contact with the ground. There's literally nothing more free than that. I mean, maybe air.
Right. Exactly. It is exactly right. It is free. You can touch a plant. You can, I know, like going back to the hippie days, you can touch a tree, hug a tree. You can be gardening in your garden. If your hands are in the dirt, you're grounding. If you're just standing outside, talking on the phone, drinking a glass of water, watching your kids play in the yard, kick your shoes off. It's just as simple as that.
Wonderful. Well, it has been such a pleasure to speak with you, Chelsea. I'll make sure that the links to everything that we've talked about and the content that you put out in the world are in the show notes below. But I think the best way to close this conversation is to pray over your endeavor. So if you wouldn't mind, would you join me in prayer?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Father God, thank you so much for this opportunity to spend time with Chelsea today. Thank you for the listeners and viewers who I hope will find this conversation to be edifying and helpful in their walk with you. And God, I pray a special blessing over her household. God, I pray that as she works to steward her body well, as she works to raise her kids, as she works to impact her community positively, that you'll bless her with your favor in those endeavors. I bind any design the enemy has against what she is doing in the world. And I pray, Lord, that you'll continually guide her and give her wisdom with regard to spreading this message of living well for you, stewarding this body you've given us, and doing it intelligently. Lord, we love you. We thank you for your creation. We thank you for this opportunity in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And to listeners and viewers, guys, this has been Coach Alex VanHouten on the Faithful Fitness Podcast. Until next time, train hard and pray harder.
Hey! If this episode helped you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a raving review so more people can find Faithful Fitness. Oh, and my dad's new devotional is almost out now. You can grab a copy for yourself and then join our free community at Better Daily by clicking on the links in the show notes below. We all have a cross to carry, but it's lighter when we do it together. So check out both links in the show notes. Don't be a big mo Bob, just do it. Until next time, don't forget, train hard and pray even harder.